Okay, good evening. This says that I'm live, so we will go ahead and get started here. Make sure my computer doesn't make sounds at me. Okay, welcome. And we are going to be talking about house sounds in this episode. A few channel announcements here before we get rolling. I have done a couple of additional things here lately. I get a little long-winded sometimes. I know that's shocking to some of you. But I have started doing like really condensed, like under 2 minute long review videos that just kind of takes the high points of my long reviews, tries to condense it about into about 2 minutes, and I've been posting that in various places, hoping to grow the audience that way while still doing my full length reviews that I have been my bread and butter. So those are not changing in there. I've also launched a couple of social media platforms in Instagram and Blue Sky. I think I posted links to those down in the description of this live stream. If I have not, I will do that as soon as I can. Ubdu, hi, thanks for being here. And also, I see Ben there became a member. That's awesome. Thank you. So, yes, please consider becoming a channel member to help me keep doing this kind of thing going forward, because this is my livelihood now. All right. Um, so then back to the topic at hand, house sounds. I was thinking about this recently, a- and like house sounds being as are we talking? Yeah. Okay. Oobdo says, "Are we talking about floorboards creaking, pipes knocking, and door hinges squeaking?" I mean, sure. Yeah, house sounds. Yep. I was just about to define it here, Oobdo. Here we go. So, a house sound in audio, I take to mean like the kind of the characteristic sounds, or like the set or the type of sounds that become associated with a specific brand. Right. So, like, let's just take, for example, the brand shit. Okay. Um, like, there a collection of sounds, or are there some kind of sonic characteristics that are like unique to that brand? Okay. When you hear a product, you go, ah, that's a piece of shit. Okay. That kind of thing there. Or, you hear a headphone and you go, even if you can't see it, you're blindfolded or whatever, you're like, ah, that's a hi-fi man, or that sounds like a hi-fi man, or whatever the case may be. So that's the kind of thing that we're talking about here. And by and large, I would have to say that yes, I'm generally a believer in house sounds. That doesn't mean that a singular brand can't have multiple sounds. Many of them often do. But I think even more frequently than that, there are characteristics within a given brand that it's their signature, right? It's their signature sound. It's just kind of the way they do things. And I think that makes sense because in audio, particularly when you get into our type of audio, where we're talking about like a niche hobby where we are really serious about this stuff, and you start getting into boutique brands, or at least brands like Shit, for example, or Hi-Fi Man, just the two that I mentioned here recently, where they are in the business of making good audio stuff, right? That is what they do. All right. When you start getting to that level, then you're talking about relatively small companies generally that have relatively small design teams, as in terms of a small number of people are usually working on the design and the development of a given product. And when you get either an individual person, which happens sometimes, or a small number of people all working on their line of products there, like, they have their ways of doing things. They have their preferences and their design philosophies and the relationships that they have built in the industry with, like, getting parts, all that, like vendors and all of that they have relationships with, and so forth. And so they just kind of naturally, I think, end up creating things that have similar characteristics. Doesn't mean they're identical, right? Doesn't mean that they can't do anything different ever. But it does mean, I think, generally speaking, that they do tend to make things that have, again, a distinguishing set of characteristics. Okay. Now, does this really matter? I mean, that's up to the ear of the beholder, right? Like, because sometimes, yeah, I mean, you fall in love with a certain company, the way they do things, and it's because it's their signature, their house sound that does something that you appreciate, okay, over and above what some other companies might do. And so you just generally get a sense that, hey, when this company puts something new out, there's a good chance you'll like it, and you probably have at least a starting point on what it's going to sound like. Again, that's not a guarantee because companies are allowed to do things differently and make different sounds. Okay, but I think generally it just kind of sets a bit of some level of expectation. Okay, for a lot of products there. So that's kind of the overarching thesis here. That yeah, I think that's what a house sound is, and yeah, I think generally they are real, but they are not locked in. All right. And so, yes, please use the comments because there are a lot of brands that we can talk about what the house sounds are. And so, in the comments, for sure, you can start naming companies and giving your thoughts on like what that company's house sound is, and then I can also riff on some of that and comment. And I also have some thoughts on different companies and what their sounds are as this thing unfolds as well. Okay, so some comments just came in. Let me catch up on those real quick. JTB, hey, JTB is back. I appreciate you being here. He says, yeah, biodynamic headphones have been giving audiophiles tinnitus since 1937. So, I mean, that is definitely an example of a house sound that has become renowned for good or ill, right? Like it's both of those. And like biodynamic, there are even like phrases out there for Bayer's treble presentation, right? I've heard it described as Mount Bayer. I think I heard that. I've seen that in a couple of places, and that's because biodynamic headphones often have a bit of a treble elevation, a bit of a treble elevation, where there's a very pronounced treble presentation. They tend to be bright. They can often be sharp and sibilant in their sound as well. And it's just one of those things where, like, if you hear that treble presentation, you're like, ah, yep, there are the buyer highs in there. And that works for some people and it doesn't for some others, right? In there. Okay, moving on with the comments. Paul Gross is back. Paul, thanks for being here again. You're here a lot and I really appreciate it. Have you gotten to the point that you could recognize some house sounds if there was a way to listen blindly without seeing the device? There are some that I probably could get pretty closer with reasonable accuracy. I don't know that I would get 100% all of the time. Um, but I mean, I used Hi-Fi Man as an example earlier, as having a house sound, and I'll talk more about that. But it's just like I have heard almost everything Hi-Fi Man has released since the year 2018, something in there, for a while, and even some models from prior to that. So I'm fairly familiar with what they sound like. And their sound generally works for me. At least their open backs do. Their closed backs, ugh, different story most of the time. Although the Isvarna is pretty good. Um, and like the Hi-Fi Man house sound, I would have called it kind of U-shaped, where it's got really good bass extension. And again, like that elevation in the upper treble where it's not quite as pronounced as like biodynamic is, and not quite as sharp or sibilant most of the time, but definitely too much for some people. I have noticed over time that Dr. Fong is figuring out how to smooth out some of the high end response on his headphones, which doesn't necessarily mean they aren't as bright. There's still sometimes some treble presence up there over and above what a lot of competitors have, but it's smoother and less piercing, um, uh, and so forth. But then like those egg-shaped hi-fi mans just have that big sound stage that has a very unique sonic or spatial presentation onto its own there. So that's a sort of an answer to Paul's question, I think, on there. If I'm familiar enough with the brand, I could probably pick it out. Yeah, I could probably pick out some oddities too. All right. MKI233 is here. Thanks for being here. Topping dead fish. I usually associate a smell with dead fish and not so much a sound, but um topping, as much as they probably would not want to admit to it, and what a lot of the ASR fan base would not want to admit to, is that toppings, yes, have a house sound. Right. There is definitely like unifying and consistent characteristics that I have heard across pieces of topping gear, be they their DACs, their amps, or their combined DAC amps in there. And that typically is they have that dead quiet, like black void kind of sonic background. Okay. They are very quiet. And so the sound kind of almost, it's like it just kind of pops in and out of existence almost, which is a different kind of experience. But they also tend to be a little bit like not necessarily sharp, but a little bit brittle sounding, a little bit thin sometimes, and they definitely have like a flat spatial presence, like very little depth to the spatial presentation, and um, they tend to not be super resolving either. And I think that's because they kind of have an over damped nature to the sound, which I mean to say that like the quiet sounds that happen after loud sounds are often squelched a bit in comparison to both competitors and the real world, unfortunately. Um, so that's how I have heard them in there. But that constitutes like that's a unique set of sonic traits that come together under that brand. And so that's a house sound, right? So as much as Topping and their fans may want to say we're the neutral ones that measure perfectly, we don't have a sound. Yes, you do. Okay. Yes, you do. All right. Uh let's see. Matthew Wiltie is here. Thanks for being here. Grado also. I had don't have much experience with Grado. That is one, or is it Grado? Grotto? I That kind of tells you I'm not super familiar with them. I mean, I'm familiar with them. I haven't heard very many of their models. Oh, was it the SR80, one of their entry level units I reviewed 3-ish years ago? And that's been about the only one I've really listened to. Just haven't had a whole lot of opportunities on that. But I'm familiar with their reputation for their house sound as being like, mid and treble forward for starters. And there. Rego is here. Thanks for being here. The new biodynamic line is pretty good. Everything after the 700X and 900X. Okay. I haven't had a chance to get to a whole lot of those yet, but that's good to know. Paul again says, are any companies known for a warm house sound? Oh yeah. Um Warm house sounds. Let's see. The newer company Laiv, I would say like the models I have heard from them tend towards slight warmth in there. The Vioelectric branded stuff that Lake People makes trends a little bit warmer. Uh let's see. Those are both source gear companies. I know there are others. I want to say Sennheiser, but this is one of those like Sennheiser is an interesting example that they have multiple different sounds, and at least in their headphone lineup, it's a little bit variable. Like the HD 600 series is a little has that like neutral warm kind of sound in there. Whereas the 800 series, HD 800 series is a little bit brighter. right? And then of course with the 600 series, it's a little bit more intimate in spatial presentation, and with the 800 series, it's a bigger, grander kind of spatial presentation in there. So that's one company that has established multiple sounds for itself. Um, let's see, but yes, Paul, there are several companies out there that have a warmer house sound. I mentioned shit earlier. Shit kind of has had two tracks to their house sound to my ears. One of them being like a warmer, fuller, and thicker kind of stereotypically tube-like sound that would kind of be exemplified by like the original Bifrost 2, the Yggdrasil, or at least the original Yiggy. Um, the Asgard series of amplifiers in there. They're just kind of that warmer, thicker, kind of, again, stereotypically tube-like kind of sound. But then they have also had like the Bifrost 2 slash 64, the Jotunheim series. Just as two examples where they trend a little bit more neutral, but regardless of what the perceived tone is, shit almost always nails it on timbre and spatial presentation, right? They have a lot of overlap between the two tones there and are always very strong in those traits as well. I think you could also throw in dynamics there, dynamics and impact. Like shit gear is often usually very like kind of like it's got some physicality to the sound in it as well. Let's see. Feliciano says, yo, Feliciano, how are you? Thanks for being here. JTB, many of the hi-fi and egg-shaped headphones have a house sound. Agreed. Yeah, we talked about that already. Uh, Feliciano corrects yo. Not exactly sure why. And then let's see. Wahid is here. Thanks for being here. No such thing as no sound unless the gear is turned off. Well, yeah. Okay. Every signal chain has its own sound without exception. I agree with that. When you're talking about electronic reproduction of audio, I think it's pretty much always going to put its spin. The signal chain is always going to put its spin on how things are done. So, Wahid, I agree in large part on that. Uh, Feliciano says, love the shit slam. YouTube censors are going to love this video. And then Yelpe Nismu, thanks for being here. I hope I said that right. Shit is the shit. Okay. Yeah, I agree. They're one of my favorite source gear companies as well, particularly for their gear that's under $1,000. Because every time they seem to release a new piece of gear under 1K, it just sets a new standard for the market, and then the rest of the market has to catch up. So I really appreciate what they do. All right, JTB. How do you feel about op amps like Burson and Gishelli use? Are you asking if like the op amps themselves have a house sound? Um, Probably. I have not extensively and intentionally tried um a lot of different op amps from the same company. Okay. Yalpe says I said it right. Okay, good. Glad I pronounced your name right. JTB says to change the sound. Okay. Yeah, I definitely have heard like those devices on which I can swap op amps. I definitely have heard changes in sound going from like Sparkos to Burson and back, or using like different TI op amps in there. I certainly have heard changes um, there, JTB. Definitely. Um, that's because on a lot of the devices where that happens, which it's typically been DACs so far, the op amps are on the output stage of the DAC that step up the voltage, the very low voltage that's come off of either the DAC chip or the resistor ladder, and stepped it up, basically been a little amplifier to step that up to line level output. And so, yeah, you have a little amp circuit on the output stage of a DAC. So you change op amps in there, then you get different sounds. I know that's controversial for some. I don't understand why that's controversial. Like I'm reminded of one time, I think it was Lachlan over at Passion for Sound a while ago, like over a year ago, maybe a couple of years now. He did this blind test on USB cables at a audio conference in Australia somewhere. Um, and someone in his comments was like, "Well, if you have identical DACs that you're using, because I think he used 2 cord TT2s connected to the same laptop via different USB cables." Because he was doing a blind test on USB cables. And someone in the comments said that the difference that people were hearing was because of unit variation in the DAC amps, the cords, the TT2s. And I'm like, well, if unit variation explains this, then like what is swapping out a cable or swapping out different types of transistors or different op amps or different what else goes in there, power supplies or whatever, what is doing that other than intentional unit variation? I don't know. Anyway, that's a little bit of a tangent. Let me get back to the comments here. Wahid says, "You were saying topping says it doesn't have a sound. That's the explanation for the no sound comment." Yeah, I was tracking with you there. That made sense. No need to read this out loud. Oh, I make sure I read it because, like, sometimes I've gone back and watched my live streams and like the recorded version. And even though I've told YouTube to replay the live chat, I haven't always seen it. Sometimes I have, and sometimes I haven't. So one of the reasons that I read out the comments and the questions is in case they don't show up and I respond to someone, then then someone who's listening or watching the recorded version still can follow the conversation. All right. Feliciano says, "Change the house sound with some bourbon." Just drinking water tonight. Oh, it was a little on the thirsty side. Bourbon doesn't help with that. Uh Bourbon is whiskey with a warm house sound. There we go. Always, this is completely off topic here, but you talk about whiskeys in general, like Scotch or Irish whiskey or bourbon. If you compare them to audio and sound signatures, whiskey or Scotch is bright, Irish whiskey is neutral, and bourbon is warm. Anyway, that doesn't help anyone with audio, but moving on. Have you tried some power conditioner or regenerator by curiosity? I have. I currently you can't see it. It's too low down there. I have a PS Audio Power Plant 12 down powering up all of this stuff over here. And I also have a review. It's an older review now that goes back a ways of the Power Plant 3 and all of that. And I do think it has cleaned things up in my house. My house was built in 1972, so it's not super ancient, but it's not necessarily the newest, latest, best practices either. Uh, so I have heard it. It does seem like that lowers the noise floor for me, cleans up the sound a little bit, and because there's less noise in the sound, it unmasks some subtler details and things of that nature. All right. JTB says Gishelli has this Torque TORQ DAC where you can swap the DAC cards out to get different sound presentations. And I have not heard of that. I'm gonna have to talk to them about that. That sounds interesting. Let's see. Henry 0366 is here. Thanks for being here. How do you feel about the opinion that differences in subjective experience across headphones are purely, or to hedge my statement, largely due to frequency response? Um, if I understand the nature of your question, there's a couple ways I can interpret your question here. Yes, one of the key reasons we hear differences between headphones, like for example, up here I have hanging a Stax SR009D, and this is the Odyssey LCD5S that just came in. Those sound different from each other, and one of the key reasons they do is because they have different frequency responses. But I think Henry's question might be going a little deeper than that. Let me read it again. How do you feel about that? Okay. He's asking if the differences between headphones are purely frequency response related. I have addressed this in several different occasions. Uh, I agree that frequency response differences between headphones is a big chunk of why they sound different, but it is not the only reason that they sound different. You can have two headphones that their drivers are capable of reproducing exactly the same frequency response, but if you position the drivers differently relative to the ear, either by distance or angling or anything like that, you can change the perception of the spatial presentation as well, in there as just one example. Is there any empirical evidence to reject this? Is Henry's follow-up question. Uh, okay. Is there any empirical evidence to reject the notion that the frequency response is purely responsible for differences in headphones? I think is Henry's question. Um, let's make sure that we understand the term empirical. All right, because I think this is one of those science terms that is often misunderstood too. Empirical just means like carefully and rigorously collected data. That does not limit it to measurements. Okay, it does not limit it to numbers. If you were to conduct a survey as part of a, a research experiment, or as part of a study, and one of your primary data streams was just say interviewing human test subjects and just asking them what they think about a particular issue or so forth. Like in my research that I did in grad school, um, I developed an interview protocol and then conducted some what we called think aloud interviews with um, undergraduate college students, where they were solving some physics problems up on a whiteboard, and as they were solving a problem, which I developed the problems and then came up with questions to like really explore their thinking, like and really get them to like say out loud why they were doing a particular thing. Like what was the thinking behind doing that, and how did this idea connect to that idea, and that sort of thing. Um, that was empirical data too, right? It's not a measurement, as in there's not a specific number associated with what I was doing there. And so it was subjective data as well, because I was asking a person what they were thinking. Okay. But the collection of it and all of that is still empirical. It's still empirical data. So to Henry's question, is there empirical data that, if I'm understanding him correctly, refutes the idea that frequency response is the only thing that matters for headphones? Um, I'm not 100% sure. I gotta say, I suspect that there is, although I wouldn't be able to tell you exactly where to find it. Um, because this hasn't other than Sean Olive's work, there's not a whole lot out there on this particular topic. But there's a lot of like anecdotal kinds of stuff that, if carefully collected and so forth, and if we were to we could collect empirical data that was not measurement focused. I don't know if it's out there. I'm spending a lot of time with this on this. That's okay. Henry, to also like answer your question in a different way, I would submit that there is not empirical data that explicitly says that frequency response is the only thing that matters either. That has very much been an overreach by people who take that position. They are stretching the data that is available further than it is able to go. Um, so like I know the team over at headphones.com, for example, is very much in the camp that frequency response is the only thing that matters for a headphone. They keep claiming that they have the science to back that up, but I have never seen the science that they are basing that on. And if they have new studies, if they have done rigorous experiments on their own and have that data, great. They need to write it up and submit it to a journal like the Journal of Audio Engineering Society or Applied Acoustics or some other peer-reviewed journal and get that evaluated and see if they can get it published. Until then, it doesn't really officially count as being part of the scientific record. Okay, moving on. Does Final Audio have a house sound? Of the units that I have heard, yes. Particularly in the D8000 series, those all have a little bit of mid forwardness to them that is kind of characteristic between the models. They had a very similar, excuse me, very similar spatial presentation, and then they kind of varied a little bit on bass response, but they were fairly similar. Uh, let's see. But I haven't heard a ton of finals. The other one that I have in, where did I put? Oh, it's back there. I have their close back, the DX3000 CL, in there. I was actually listening to it a little bit earlier today. I got it out while I was running the vacuum cleaner because that was helps like see what its isolation is like. So I was using this thing, Theo M33 DAP, to power that closed back final. It sounded pretty good. I was surprised it was a little bit more controlled mid-range than they have typically had in their other models I've heard. All right. Final Audio makes the prettiest IEMs. Okay. Yalpe's back. Lachlan also made a video about USB cable using Audacity app to show that the wave pattern image isn't the same at the end of the USB cable and the original file. It's an older video. Okay. Yeah. That's a I didn't know he had that one. That's an interesting test, and it's kind of similar to an idea I have had for testing a lot of this stuff. That if you take like this is a mini DSP ears rig underneath the LCD5S here, which is not like the highest quality of microphones and all of that in there, but I have given some thought. I don't have the programming chops nor the access to the gear to make this happen, but it seems like you could assemble an audio system, put music through it, and then record its output through microphones like that, and then run that through an ADC, analog to digital converter, and actually compare the samples that are recorded with the samples from the original file and see how different they are. Switch out something in the signal chain, do it again, and just see how they are all different now. And so like so a little bit more like holistic measuring the whole signal chain kind of a thing. Change one piece, see what happens. Okay. Feliciano asks, do people over at ASR believe in house sound? I don't know. Matthew Wilty, old Macintosh has a house sound. It's shifting a little bit now after the ownership change. That doesn't surprise me. Um, that reminds me of Audio Technica. Like Audio Technica has they had a chief headphone designer for a long, long time, and I think he's still there. But his protege is a younger woman, and she was the one boy, I'm blanking on her name, but she was the one who was the driving force behind their new like ADX 7000, and I think she was behind the ADX 3000 as well. And her designs have been like a warmer, more Western friendly kind of tuning as opposed to a lot of other Audio Technicas, which have been more like Japanese tuned, where they're brighter and they have more mid range focus to them. So I think that's kind of a similar thing to what Matthew is explaining about, like with Macintosh, the ownership changed, and so the sound is starting to change. Kind of a similar situation there. Wahid, empirical understanding is from his trial and error. I know this because I tried it. No theoretical basis need. That's my. I think empirical requires a little bit more than just trial and error on an individual level, but I do think we need to make sure that we understand that empirical can include subjective data. It is not necessarily just a measurements with numbers associated with them. Okay. Wahid is agreeing with Matthew about the Macintosh sound. And then Henry says, for the record, totally think frequency response does not explain the subjective experience, just sanity checking. Okay. Yeah. And I agree with you on that. Like, I read through the bulk of Sean Olive's work a few months ago, and then also read his summary of his own work that he published, I think, in 2022. And I actually agree with him when he says that frequency response is the number one predictor of perceived sound quality. I do agree with that because if you don't like something's tone, you're just not going to like its sound, and you're not going to ascribe it as having good sound quality. Uh, but there is a gap between leading predictor and explains everything. Like those are not the same thing. So anyone who and again, I don't know what the basis for the claim that frequency response is the only thing that matters is really coming from, because I can't find it in the scientific literature anywhere. Okay. But if they're basing it on Sean Olive's work, they are stretching his work further than even he himself has taken it. All right. Let's see. AY, let's see. Sorry, my dog is barking. I don't know if you can hear her. AY Kigai is here. Hi, as an audio reviewer, how much time per day would you say you spend listening, and how do you protect your ears? Yeah, that is a good question. The answer to that, how much time do I actually get to listen per day, varies. Okay. Um, like for example, like I do this job from home, so I work from home. We have one son who we are homeschooling through this school year, and then hopefully next year he's back in public school. Uh, and then uh, and then my partner works out of the house. She is also a professor, and so she has variable hours and all of that as a result too. So when the house is empty, that's when I can do my filming, right? And on days when I do a lot of filming and video editing, I have a lot less time to sit down and listen. So it kind of goes in cycles as to when I have more listening time versus when a lot more of my time by proportion goes to actually, video production side of things. So that is a difficult question to answer, but I would say I usually get an hour a day minimum in of just listening. But then there are are other days when I will get multiple hours in. Let's see. Uh Wahid says, Henry, there's also attack and decay characteristics, transient response speed, a bunch of stuff that's not in frequency response chart. Okay. Agreed. There are a lot of things that are in there. Some things can be calculated from a frequency response chart if the headphone itself is truly minimum phase. Not all of them are in there. So like some of the transient response and all that can be extracted and calculated from in there. But not everything. Let's see. Yelpe says the ADC thing sounds interesting to try. Yeah, I agree. I wish I had a good quality ADC here, and I wish I had the programming chops to write a program to make it do all of that, but I don't. Um, Henry says that he agrees that he can hear those things that Wahid was saying, but can't rule out being fooled by the frequency response. Yeah, so boy, we often come back to this topic, right? Like frequency response. I need to do a full video on what exactly is frequency response, how we measure it, what it tells us, and what it doesn't. I need to get on that. And the tricky part is that adjusting the frequency response through equalization and all of that really can change some perception of like soundstage. For example, like you hear the discussion of the amount of 2 kilohertz response. Uh if you pull back 2 kilohertz a little bit, it seems like the soundstage widens out a little bit, but at the sacrifice of timbre and all of that, which I have heard. Right? I have listened to a headphone and sat there and fiddled with 2 kilohertz up and down and kind of heard the soundstage do this, okay, come in and out, and so forth. So, like, and because of the way our auditory systems work, you can make a case that we really only hear frequency information, or that our ear only responds to frequency information. But, there's still like more to putting a headphone together or an audio system at large together than the frequency response in there. So I agree it's complicated, but also that there's more to it than just FR. Okay, Beaverish is back. Do you feel that Shit's house sound has started leaning towards neutral dynamic now that they are focusing more on measurements? I feel like their newer products sound very similar. I do think that they have, like I mentioned earlier, that to my ears, Shit kind of had two house tones. Basically, one that was like a little warmer, thicker, kind of stereotypically tube-like, and then another one that was a bit more neutral. But regardless of the tone, they uh, they were quite dynamic, as you pointed out, and then they also had excellent spatial presentation and timbre to my ears in there. And it does seem like more by proportion, more of their products have gone towards that, gone along that neutral path. However, they still have like the Asgard X that was kind of on that warmer, thicker track in there. That's a newer product as well. So I see where you're coming from there, Beaverish, but not completely. JTB says, in my experience with headphones, sends are warm and natural, focal are dynamic and punchy, focal clear and utopia. Odyssey have the bass and darker sound sig. And you'll be curious to see what the next Bifrost sounds like. It's definitely gotten more neutral with each version. Okay. I agree with a lot of what you said about those headphone companies and their house sounds. Yes. I don't know if I personally would call Odysseys dark, but they definitely have a combination of mid-range and treble response that is like characteristically Odyssey, and like you kind of know it when you hear it, kind of a thing. Odysseys often also tended to be a little bit more on the dynamic side, quite impactful, um, and so forth. They also have this, and focals are the same way here. Like Odyssey and Focal are interesting to me because they're similar. It's just like they're kind of like planar and dynamic driver versions of each other in a weird way. In that they both often tend toward a more dynamic and punchy sound, and they both often can have a little bit too much mid range for my ears, where they have like some shout and some honk in them, at least to my ears, in there and so forth. And then they also both have this spatial presentation where you're it's not necessarily in the head, but you're in the presentation. And I have used the analogy before of like odysseys and focals to me sound like you're at a symphony performance, but you're standing on the maestro's stand and all of the instruments are kind of right around you, like that. Whereas like Hi-Fi Man's the Sen HD 800 series would be good examples of like you're sitting back in the audience a little bit and everything is happening out in front of you a little bit more. Uh Paul is back, says any plans to review the new Shitliar 5 in the near future? I don't have a line on one yet. I would love to review it. I don't have there's not an opportunity sitting right in front of me. Um, I have on my to-do list, I need to shoot an email over to shit and say, you've made a lot of new stuff. Send it, send it, send it. And then it'll just be a matter of if they have one available and when. JTB says the Yote 3 has a nice balance of good measurements and still not totally neutral. I'm really impressed with the Yote 3. Totally punches above its price point. I have been using the Yote 3 a lot. Uh Truthfully, it was sitting on my desk. You can't see it, but it's right in front of me. It was sitting on my desk as kind of like a mid-fi as part of a mid-fi reference stack. Like, and I used it to review several headphones that I've reviewed lately. Um, where's my list real quick? I can tell you that since that thing, but yeah, I mean, I used the Yote 3 to help with the Ananda Unveiled, the Theo JT7, the HE 600, YH 4000 from Yamaha, the Abyss Joel, Odyssey LCDS 20, the recent Grell, all of that. I've been using it a lot just because it is mostly neutral, has a lot of power, drives a lot of headphones well, and so forth. It's a good piece of kit. Let's see, where did I leave off? Beaver says, any chance of reviewing the Shure 1540 and 1840? Yeah, you don't feel they get enough love in the community. I don't have plans for that. If you have them and you're willing to share them, I will review them. Are they still available for sale? I do try to make sure that I review stuff that people can actually buy in there as well. Stephen Davis, hi, thanks for being here. Considering the Mimir outclassed the Bifrost 2, do you feel shit will update the Bifrost in the near future? I mean, they are working on. Hey, thanks, Ty Webb. Thanks for the super thanks there. Really appreciate it. Back to Stephen Davis' question. They are working on a Bifrost 3, as far as I know. And the reason that I know that is because Jason Stoddard has been saying things like, uh, they can't seem to figure out a way to make their fork beard control module be compatible with previous Bifrost 2s, which is unfortunate because the part of the purpose of the Bifrost 2 series was that it was modular and you could upgrade it. But like, so if you want their new Bifrost to have fork beard on it, you're gonna have to buy a whole new unit. It sounds like. So they are working on it, as far as I know. I mean, and they know they have to. They know what they've made and know that they've put a pinch on their own project or product, excuse me. Beaverish is back. How do you differentiate something that is mid-fi versus hi-fi aside from the price? Um, the answer to that is really super complex, and it basically comes down to it's in the middle, right? I don't mean to sound flip here, but like mid-fi is generally referring to those things that perform on a level that is better than entry level, but not necessarily hi-fi, right? Um, that normally correlates with price, doesn't have to, but generally speaking, it does in there. And so, that's what I would say for the most part. There is how it's done. And like, I personally, would consider most hi-fi products, generally speaking, are uh, individual unit prices of $1,000 and up. No one is obligated to agree with me on that. And JTB says, Jason says new Bifrost coming sometime in 2026. No date set yet. Well, you realize we're already a fourth of the way through 2026. So they got to get on that. Okay. Where did I leave off on my notes? Got some good questions there. Keep them coming in. Trying to think of like some of the other more unique house sounds that I have heard out there. Uh SMSL DAX. You know, they have their sound too. I think I've kind of referred to it in the past as like chi-fi neutral, but they definitely have their own sound there. Paul says, if you quit this gig tomorrow and could have only one DAC, amp, headphone, and streamer, what would they be? The disaster scenario. Let's see. Well, probably my Lampizator Baltic 3 right here as a DAC. My LTA Z10E as the amp. Susvara unveiled for the headphone. Streamer would probably be the optical Rendu, and I would likely want to use that with something like HQ Player, because my Lampy DAC here, to my ears, is at its best with DSD, and specifically some oversampled DSD. I have HQ Player feeding it right now, oversampling everything to DSD 128. I would go higher than DSD 128 if it weren't for the fact that the little Mac Mini that's running HQP doesn't have the processing power to convert Redbook CD quality to DSD 256. It just gets too stuttery. Can't handle that. So it tops out at 128. All right. Beaver says, I feel like shit's proposed upgrade paths for their products tend to be short lived. Bifrost 2 only has one upgrade so far, and now we have Bifrost 3 up in the work. Okay. It would not surprise me if what shit ends up doing is they give you the option of upgrading the USB input and the um why am I blanking on this? The DAC board in the Bifrost currently to whatever the Bifrost 3 ends up being. The problem is they haven't figured out how to put Forkbeard in there to my knowledge. So if you wanted to use Forkbeard with it, you would probably need to buy a new unit. But I think if I understood correctly, they're still gonna have upgrade module cards that are backwards compatible. Yeah, Michael's backing me up on that one there at the end. Okay. Uh, Wahid wants to know what are the factors that affect create good Pratt. Okay, pace, rhythm, and timing. Uh, yeah. So the first one would be time alignment. Um, Signal chains, audio signal chains. At least before the headphone, if you're a headphone user. Uh, but speakers, particularly speakers that have multiple drivers and crossover networks, they often kind of spread out the timing of the individual signals, and it comes down to the electromagnetic energy that travels through the audio system. Okay, that is the audio signal, right? It travels as an electromagnetic wave, right, through the audio system. Does not move at the speed of light as electromagnetic waves do in a vacuum. It moves at like, between about 65 and 85% the speed of light in there, through there. And that speed of propagation varies with frequency. Tends to be that the higher frequencies travel through faster than the lows and all of that. So, pace, rhythm, and timing is at its best when you get all of that lined up appropriately and get like the least amount of time smearing in there. Um, that's the first answer. For something like a headphone or a speaker, I think you would need a really fast transient response in there to be able to do it right as well. So those are a couple of factors there, Wahid. JTB, Desert Island Rig, and what music albums? Desert Island Rig. Did you just spell Desert Island? That sounds much more fun. Uh, I don't know. Is there electrical power on this desert island, or does everything have to be battery powered? I will say on a desert island, probably not any of the hi-fi men unveiled because you get a little bit of wind and pick up the sand pebbles and shoot them right through there. Of course, he probably would do that to the normal ones anyway. Uh, Probably the same system that I just named there though. And then music. Wow. I don't do well with these favorites questions. When you ask me favorite music, there's a lot of music that I like. Um, like in my music library here. Come on. Where'd it go? There it is. Like I have almost all of the AC/DC albums, just going alphabetical here, not necessarily in order of preference. AC/DC, a whole bunch of other artists, but these would just be like artists that I kind of collect their discography or very close to. Aerosmith, uh, Anathema, Baroness, Beatles. We could be here a while if I keep going all the way through this. Uh try to keep it more to real highlights here because there are others that will go on here that I don't name. Let's see here. Discography. Deep Purple, Don Henley, Eagles, Flaming Lips, Fleetwood Mac, Garbage, Genesis, Green Day. There's a lot. Hans Zimmer, Herbert von Karajan. I don't want to go on this all night, but you're starting to get an idea, maybe. Favorite desserts. There we go. I will confess, I have always really liked the tartness and sweetness of lemon meringue pie. Really good. Although my mother makes a really good cherry pie. She picks fresh cherries because they grow near where she lives, and that's really good too. I guess I like pie a lot. Feliciano says he wouldn't necessarily say they're doing something magical with fork beard. Can be handy if you need the volume control and a little bit of parametric EQ. MKI says, can't believe you aren't taking test tones to the desert island. Yeah. Sciential potentialist, that long name is here. What's up, big dog? How are we doing tonight? Big dog, huh? Okay. I'm well. How are you? Thanks for being here. JTB says, I've had the JM XTC open and closed. John really knows how to tune a headphone. John has done he did really good work on some of those Hi-Fi Men closed backs that he changed and changed the tuning on that sounded pretty darn good. I agree. He has a good ear for that. Paul asks, do I get out and see much live music? Not a lot. So here's the thing, like I love listening to music and all that. I don't like crowds. And so when I go to concerts and all of that, I don't really um I just get distracted by by what's going on with all the people around, and then also just the live sound doesn't sound that good. Okay. Anyway, I have been to a few symphony performances that I have liked a lot, but like rock concerts and that sort of thing aren't really my jam. Uh JTB says Barry Manilow's greatest hits. Not for me, but for you, sure. Here's non-audio yet audio related question. Your take on coffee. Favorite coffee? Um Usually I buy like the my daily coffees anyway. We buy whole beans from Costco where they have their Kirkland brand stuff. They've got some pretty good like whole bean coffee, and then we grind it and make it here at home. But coffee is best strong and black. Don't EQ your coffee. Let's see. Have I auditioned PS Audio DACs or amps? I have not yet. Actually, I would like to. Also, what's the giant box on the shelf behind you? Looks like a nuclear powered amp. This thing? That's my LTA Z10E. Or if you're talking about this, that's a Lampizator Baltic 3. I'm not sure which one you're talking about there. All right, we are a little past the hour mark here. I'll give you a moment or two to come up with any last minute questions here. and then we'll call it a night here pretty soon. Meze Strata. I have not heard from that. I need to reach out to my Meze contact. Uh, I've had another wave of gear come in, so I've kind of slowed down requests for a moment while I work through what I've got. But yeah, I recognize Strata as a new one that people are interested in. Anything else? All right. Well, thank you all for being here. This was fun as usual. Thanks for all of your continued support and so forth. But I think we will call it a night there. So thanks again, everyone. Enjoy the music.